Welcome, everyone, to the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin, or as the locals call it, DGAP. Thank you for coming out this evening. This is the last event this year in the Remaking America series, which is a cooperation with the Cluster of Excellence Contestations of the Liberal Script from Free University, where we look at new or trending or developing ideas in the United States that are shaping today's and tomorrow's American democracy and foreign policy with leading voices from the United States. And so thank you to Scripps, as always, for the fruitful partnership. And tonight we also have a Scripps professor joining the conversation, but we also have two speakers from the United States joining us to talk about China-US tech and science competition and suspicion. From the very beginning of the year, it was clear that China was going to have to be one of the issues that we look at. China policy, US policy toward China has been central to US foreign policy, at least since the beginning of the first Trump administration. And even though the China policy has been so far in the second Trump administration not that clear, it nonetheless is a very important issue for US politics today and tomorrow. And to discuss this with us, I have a partner in crime who is not my strategic rival, but my strategic partner here at the DGAP, Michael Laha, who is the senior fellow for China in our Geoeconomics, Geopolitics, and Technology Center. And he will be leading us through the discussion tonight. So, Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, for being a strategic partner in this project tonight, which is my distinct honor to moderate. As Rachel said, I'm a fellow that covers here China and tech issues, and I should just add, I am concurrently serving as an external advisor to the Federal Foreign Office, but in this capacity right now, I'm only acting as my DGAP hat and not in my Federal Foreign Office external advisor hat. Okay, let's get started. Let me introduce the speakers. To my very far is Mara Hvistendahl. She's an investigative correspondent at the New York Times and spent a significant amount of time early in her career in China as a reporter for the news section of the journal Science. This has since led her to be a reporter for The Intercept. She was a national fellow at New America, and she actually had the whole China Bureau of Science. A single bureau. And she wrote an excellent book published in 2020 called The Scientist and the Spy, A True Story of China, the FBI, and Industrial Espionage. And it talks about a very specific case of industrial espionage involving a Beijing company. And we will talk about her reporting on that issue. Right next to her is Eileen Guo. She's a features and investigations reporter for MIT Tech Review, and she's written on a host of issues, but collectively they focus on how big tech and our ongoing tech revolution entrenches existing inequities and injustices. She's received numerous grants and awards, including a Ida Wells Fellow in the year 2020 and an International Women's Media Foundation grantee in 2017 and 2018. And she wrote in the year 2021 an excellent investigation into the China Initiative, which is a Trump administration 1.0 special unit in the Justice Department that was set up to go after economic espionage with a special focus on China as well. We will learn from that reporting as well. And last but certainly not least is Kostka, who will serve as our discussant for today. She's a sinologist and professor at the Free University of Berlin, where she leads the Institute for China Studies, and she has a special focus on China's digital transformation. She's previously been a professor at the Hertie School, the Frankfurt School of Finance, and she was also a consultant at McKinsey. She has degrees from Oxford, Johns Hopkins, and LSE. Okay, welcome to all three of you. I thought I'd point out a few kind of milestones from the first few months of the second Trump administration to help set the scene. Very soon after the Trump administration got started on the 20th of January this year, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that he would aggressively cut visas for Chinese students studying in the United States. This generated a significant backlash in Washington, so much so that Donald Trump had to say in front of the media camera that he was actually very open to Chinese students coming to the United States and that he would hope as many as 600,000 PRC national students would come to the US. That's actually a very large number because the last number we have on record is from the year prior, and there are 277,000 Chinese students studying in the United States. So we were actually to reach that goal, it would have to be doubled. Very soon after the Trump crackdown on the US scientific enterprise started, with a special focus on an anti-DEI campaign, that has led to 6,500 fewer projects being funded by the United States compared to the previous year. And this crackdown is probably going to continue because now the budget is being decided for next year's science spending. And we have some proposals in the pipeline that look very bleak, including an 18 billion cut to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, which would be a 40% cut if it were to go through as is, a 1.1 billion cut to the Department of Energy, which would be a 14% cut, and a proposed 5.1 billion cut, which would be 57% of the National Science Foundation's funding. And in all of this, we have a very eager People's Republic of China leadership looking to absorb US-based talent that is no longer happy with the state of affairs. China created a new visa program, the so-called K visa program, especially aimed at young STEM talent. And that K visa allows you to go to China without an employer sponsoring you. And we had a US-based Nobel Prize winner, his name is Ardem Papatutian, wrote an op-ed over the summer where he said that within weeks of the announced cuts by Trump, he received an opportunity to go to China to move his entire lab there, which he's, for now anyways, declined. So in this context, we are having to find a way to recognize that there's a kind of competition between the US and China that involves science, but that the measures we use to implement them can really backfire. And so with that background, I thought I'd start with you, Mara. You wrote this excellent book in 2021 titled The Scientist and the Spy. And who is the scientist and who is the spy?
Is this on? Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And yeah, it's good to be here with such an esteemed group. Well, in the book, I deliberately left that a bit ambiguous. I wrote it at a time when these early prosecutions of scientists were starting in the United States. I focused on one kind of particularly colorful case involving a man named Robert Moore, who was found like literally digging up seeds in the ground in outside Des Moines in Iowa. These were Monsanto seeds. So the allegation was, these were trade secrets that the corporation had spent, untold amounts developing, and that the U.S. government would take on the costs of prosecuting him because this was American IP, and so this case was a way to kind of look at this broader issue of the U.S. government kind of creating what was at that time a novel argument that IP theft was a national security threat, and that government resources should be devoted to fighting it. And chosen in part because you started with this sort of something out of like a Coen Brothers film, like this guy in a cornfield, and then the FBI actually went to great lengths, like they flew surveillance planes overhead to track him through corn country. They bugged his car. They went through his trash. They launched this like 18-month operation to try to get this guy. And at some point, he and his collaborators actually tried to smuggle seeds back to China in microwave popcorn bags, but then like the agents were at the border and got the bags, but they still didn't arrest him, and so it was a very extensive cat and mouse game. It kind of gives you a sense of the resources that the government was willing to devote to this, with the twist that then at the end Monsanto was acquired by Bayer, so it was actually no longer an American firm. So initially, you started to see these cases brought on behalf of primarily large corporations in the United States, often targeting ethnic Chinese defendants. And then later, there were cases emerging involving professors, academics. Those tended to be a bit different and involve like different violations, sometimes lesser violations. But it was clear in all of these cases. So I used this one colorful case of this guy found in a cornfield to tell this broader story. And it was clear that in a number of cases, the government was committing errors. There were a number of people charged where the charges were later dropped or they were seriously downgraded, which is pretty unusual in a U.S. context. So, it was a way to tell this larger story.
Great, thanks, Mara. We'll definitely return to that. Eileen, I wanted to go over to you. What is the China Initiative?
Let's see if I can also try this on. It's on. Is it on? Okay, excellent. So the China Initiative was a way for the US government under the first Trump administration to really signal a seriousness of charging, prosecuting any kinds of crimes that had a national security nexus to China. And it was purposefully quite broad. There were cases like the one that Mara just described, but there were cases that fell more into the hacking category. There were corruption cases. There were one of my favorite ones, because it was truly so odd, was there was a man that ran a turtle smuggling ring that was caught with turtles. What is the national security nexus? Unclear, but it was a way of saying, we are looking at this. And maybe a better known example is actually the CFO of Huawei. When she was charged, that was also put into this category. I think it's interesting that and what the China Initiative really became known for is not these kind of broader cases around economic espionage, trade theft, these more serious crimes, if you will. It became known for prosecutions, in many cases overblown, of academics, often with Chinese heritage or backgrounds, for failing to disclose, or so alleged the government, their ties to Chinese institutions, whether that was collaborations or, the government said they were actually affiliated with the Chinese military or members of the military or different things like this. And a lot of these ended up really falling apart. So the China Initiative today, we look at it as something that was really targeting academics and that had I was going to say side effect, but perhaps it wasn't a side effect of really targeting people of Chinese origin as well.
Very good. And I think you sort of left a hook there for us to grab onto later on. Guinea, over to you. How do you make sense of some of the things that you observe going on in Washington today?
I mean, Washington seems to be in a very different setting than we are in Europe or Germany, right? So I was just sitting, you mentioned the number of Chinese students, right, in the US. Anyone guess how many Chinese students we have in Germany? Any guesses? I give you 40,000, 100,000, or 200,000. Yeah, 40, the low ball, right? So, I mean, it's a very different setting here. So I think we, of course, as a China scholar, we read all these things. And I mean, there are a lot of things that come to my mind. I mean, first of all, it all also connects with what we've seen after COVID, a little bit the Asian hate movement, right? It's not fun to be Asian in the US sometimes. But in Germany, we don't have that because we have less Chinese students. There are only 6,000 Chinese researchers. So it wasn't such a dynamic field. We don't have a Trump, right? So so I think we all looked and were shocked by the China initiative. We also the espionage. We have economic espionage cases in Germany, but it wasn't so widely reported. These cases didn't come to the front news. Yeah, this was more dealt in the courts. So yeah, it's but what it did to Germany and also to Europe, we observed that there was a lot of action in the US, and it made us also think that we don't have any framework. We don't know how to deal with these cases. So it pushed us to think about what kind of process do we have, right? In case we have these espionage things, in case we don't have an initiative, but we do need some clear process. Do we want this institutionalized or not? So there were then debates in Europe, there were debates in Germany, and within Germany it was federal, but also each university and also the university association. So yeah, we had similar debates. So in a way, even though it's horrible, it sparked us a little bit to get our own house in order.
Okay, so one of the themes that emerges in the discussion is a certain point of view U.S. intelligence services have on this issue. And you talk about this in your book, Mara. In particular, you talk about an idea called 1,000 grains of sand that gets applied as a lens to look at this issue. What is that, and why should we be thinking about it? Don't forget your microphone.
I was about to just start talking. So intelligence agencies around the world have traditionally focused on espionage, right? So on counterespionage and spying for national security purposes, figuring out what their adversary is trying to do. The idea of looking at economic espionage and IP theft is a relatively new one. It dates to the 1990s, where post 1989, the intel agencies, especially in the U.S., were looking for a new purpose, and one idea that came up was to start to look at focus on economic espionage in addition to traditional espionage. And so in that area, there was actually a new law passed that made economic espionage and IP theft a crime, like a crime that like a major national security violation, as opposed to like a trade secret stuff that would be dealt with through the civil law. And at that time, you had, I think, relatively poor China expertise in the intel agencies, and I think that's changed, hopefully, for the better since then. There's still some lingering issues, and the one theory that was floated at the time was that to distinguish China from the Russian approach to spying, that China would send out kind of all its people to collect a single grain of sand and bring it back to the country, and that these grains of sand could somehow be like assembled into a beach. And so the idea was that China would spy by sending out, thousands and thousands of people and bringing pieces of intelligence back. So, I mean, you can see how this idea might lead to problems, because it suggests that Chinese spies are everywhere. There are, even if this person's collecting what's a seemingly innocuous small piece of information, that's somehow part of some larger plan. But this was a theory that was taken pretty seriously for a while. The ideas have shifted since then, but as we've seen from the cases where charges were dropped, their problems have remained, and the idea of that some scientists were racially profiled, or that they were targeted because they were Chinese, it remains. And I think there is you have to lend credence to the fact that some of them were. It's also quite complicated because China has taken these botched prosecutions and has taken this idea of racial profiling and sort of run with it, and kind of made a narrative out of it at the same time. So you would argue that that's even more reason to be very, very careful in how you choose which case to bring, which person to look at, and the narrative of and reality of racial profiling has also helped China attract back talent and attract even non-Chinese scientists, and that's something that they had sought to do for many years or decades, often unsuccessfully, but now are having more success.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that these cases generated heated debate in Chinese kind of social media debates. And every time something sort of goes wrong in the US, including there was years ago a shooting of a Chinese student near an American university, a case like that also generates a debate. And it's all, I think, sort of aimed a little bit at maligning the U.S. image and sort of moving people back. I wanted to return to you, Eileen. You left us with a hook, which is, you said maybe there was some other sort of motivation, a kind of signaling mechanism between the China initiative. Would you mind sort of continuing on that line a little bit, and maybe also now that there's thoughts in Washington, D.C. to revive it, what that might mean?
Well, I think the comparison that you made about how cases in Germany haven't gotten so much attention is a really useful way to think about it. In the United States, this was very much a Trump administration-driven initiative. Trump had somewhat infamously said in the start of his first administration that the Chinese were here to rape America. There was just this really horrific language. And so this it seemed like a very political project in a lot of ways. What we found when we actually looked at these cases, we ended up building a database of all of the known cases that the Justice Department itself was saying, these are wins that we have. So we thought, well, what if we actually take them at their word and try to understand whether this program succeeds by their own metrics? And so we ended up building a database of, I believe it was 77 cases of about 151 defendants. 148 of those were individuals. There were a couple of institutions as well. And what we found was that the program was, first of all, very not transparent. When we sent them questions about these cases, they ended up removing 39 defendants from their list. And these were oftentimes cases that they had celebrated as examples of what they were really doing well. It was far less effective at either combating espionage or economic espionage. And what ended up happening is that by 2020, so the program was then a year and a half, 2 years in, the focus had really shifted from economic espionage, trade theft, hacking, corruption, to these cases of research integrity, where university professors and academics allegedly had not fully disclosed all of their funding sources or affiliations. So 50% of new cases in 2020 were these sorts of cases. And while some of them did have to do with, dual use cases of technology, a lot of it was basic research. There was a lot of cancer research that was being targeted. And the program ended up being closed in 2022 officially. It was replaced by a program that was a little less focused on China. Did I mention how many people were Chinese? I think I did not. So one of the big concerns about the program that especially rights organizations were bringing up was that this was disproportionately affecting Chinese origin or heritage researchers, but this was all anecdotal. It was hard to really get an understanding of this. And so when we put together this database, we found that 88% of people that were being criminally charged were ethnically Chinese. And when you look at the numbers that were then actually convicted of crimes, it was far lower, the number of people that were convicted.
And so some of this has already generated a kind of stream of returnees to China. There's a publication, the South China Morning Post, which actually runs a tracker of these cases. And there's right now 15 Chinese heritage or Chinese citizen, formerly US-based scientists who are profiled on there. And it's clear that China is gaining from it. But the question I sort of have for you, Guinea, is US's loss a gain for Europe? Is there any chance that Europe can scoop up some of this talent?
Yes, Europe. Good. Let's talk about Europe. Actually, when I listen to you, right, I as a professor, I feel so sorry for them, right, for all these people who were wrongly sued, because that really, what you have is your reputation, right? And wasn't there a suicide case also involved, right? And so I think it's really dramatic. And so, yes, the option is, where do you want to go? Do you really want to go to Europe? Let's talk about Europe. So Europe, actually, also in 2020, started again. It wasn't just really, I actually looked it up. Knowledge production was no longer pure academic endeavor, but it really became also in this geopolitical security game involved. So the first document in Europe in 2020 was it actually that it said we need to couple open science with geopolitical awareness. So that was the first. And then if you look 21 and 22, yeah, I really actually checked it for this talk today, and I was shocked because you can really see how it got worse and worse. So in 21, suddenly there was like, oh, we need to safeguard our values and strategic interests in research and innovation. And then in 2022, it was even more, we need to really include geopolitical security. And this is Europe who wants open research. Yeah, but at the end, they started to do both. We want open research, but... yeah, and that was really new, and it's similar like in the US. And so what did Europe do? Because Europe is Europe, and they're like, they can't do anything. So every country can still follow their own. And just for fun, I looked up, so what did the countries do? So we have Germany, and I will talk about it in a second, but Holland, actually, in April this year, they passed a knowledge security screening bill that aims to screen all individuals who are gained access to parts of Dutch knowledge institutions where there's sensitive technology. What does it mean? You really get screened. Yeah, and this is like across Holland. So they're trying to institutionalize processes to make sure that no data, like sensitive data, is not given to Chinese nationals and maybe also other nationals. But probably it's also really aimed at China. I don't know. Italy, on the other hand, says they want to create cultural openness. So they go to China, they have a talk at Beida University and just say, oh, historical links. So they're trying to not follow, let's say, the European Union's laws, but they just want to jump in and basically advocate Italy as a good research engagement partner. And finally, with Hungary, what do we guess Hungary does, right? The narrative is opportunity and alignment with China. So there's no one, this is typical Europe, right? In Brussels, they have all these documents, but in the end, every country does what they want. Just very quickly, what did Germany do? Yeah. So Germany, so we don't have an initiative, but we thought about institutionalizing, also thinking about what can we do. So at the federal level, all documents came. Yeah, so we have what we call the German Wissenschaftsrat. I think the translation is the German Science and Humanities Council. And they, first time in 2020, published some guidelines. And in this year, they published more guidelines. And these guidelines end up then at universities. And the universities then, you know, like, okay, what do we need to do? And the guidelines is always like, oh, we need to protect us from authoritarian countries. They are not just saying just China. They're really trying to be political correct. They just say all authoritarian countries, but in a way, universities hear China. So, for example, at the Free University where I'm based, we now had, since 2022, have a China Council. But we discuss it. We discuss what this council writes about, oh, be careful, dual use, right? And it's good to have these discussions. But the problem is a little bit, I still think there is no real path of what to do, because every subject differs. We have different ethic boards, we have different ways of assessing it. But at the end of the day, it's really, yeah, a lot of people are left a little bit to basically personal judgment. How do you really secure research? And I think there, so again, at universities, we've seen some have done more, like the Free University has done more with the councils. They have done some guidelines for professors. Other universities have done nothing. There are even other universities who are really extreme. Erlangen, Nuremberg was a classic case. They actually stopped having students funded by the China Scholarship Council. So they said all these students are, you know, potential threat of espionage. And if we discussed this at the Free University, and like, no, of course, we welcome these students. They come from very poor areas in China. They get the scholarship, and yes, it's paid by the Chinese government, but it doesn't mean there's all espionage. And most of them are not even in sensitive subjects, right? Like AI or like certain tech sectors or dual use areas. So, but some universities in Germany also said we are not taking any China scholarship. Actually, it was just one. But it just shows even yeah, there's no one guideline. We don't have one China initiative, thank God. But it's basically a learning process. And yeah, I leave it to that for now.
Maybe a few two fingers from me on that. The China Scholarship Council program was a controversial starting 2 or 3 years ago when reports surfaced that the contracts that students have to sign to receive this government funding were committing themselves to behaving in a way that was in alignment with sort of CCP narratives, and that they could potentially be made to repay tuition fees if they didn't. And it was this particular language in the contract that was seen as problematic. And some universities have decided that they could rework these contracts and move forward with this type of funding program. And some have decided that they would discontinue them entirely. Yeah, I think I wanted to open up a little bit the question to both of you, how you see the Trump administration is steering things forward, and what you think, especially European policymakers, should be alert to. I'll start with you, Mara.
First question was that the Trump going forward.
Where you see the Trump administration steering this issue, if there's at all any way to grasp at a clear trend line.
I find the Trump administration's policy on China very hard to discern. In the second Trump administration, the first one was a bit more clear cut. I think this one, it's seesawing a bit toward let's sell chips to China and let's prosecute people for selling for smuggling chips to China. So,
can you elaborate on that case?
Yeah, that was all in one day. On Monday, the Justice Department in the U.S. announced the prosecution of two individuals for smuggling NVIDIA chips to China, and on the same day, President Trump announced that he was going to allow the sales of the NVIDIA H200 chips to China. So, which it's been a matter of debate. Not the most sophisticated chip, but still one that many people are concerned about ending up in China. So, yeah. So I find a policy very hard to discern, and I wouldn't want to venture what is going to happen in the coming months. I would just add on the point of universities vetting ties. I do think there was this perception in the United States, and I would imagine it applies to Europe too, that some at universities had been a bit naive in terms of like partnerships that they entered into with institutions in China, who they accepted money from. I mean, this had a human rights component as well as a military or dual use component, and at least initially in the United States, this was dealt with at the individual level. So, one complaint of the researchers that were being targeted was that, their universities had encouraged them to go to China, encouraged them for years to build ties and to be, often for financial reasons, right, to go be the one who starts this program in China, or go seek money from China, and that then suddenly the tables had turned and they were under scrutiny for doing these things. But at the same time, I think there maybe was some who felt that there was need for correction, for vetting some of these partnerships. So I'm sorry I can't offer a prediction for what's going to happen. Yeah, but maybe Eileen can.
I think we're all grasping. Eileen, the same question goes to you. And just so you know, you to prepare as well. What you
I also do not know if I can make any predictions about this administration, but there are some signs of what has continued to happen. The prosecutions of individuals that strategy seems to have shifted a little bit, according to lawyers that are in this space. But this concern about research integrity continues, and it seems to have shifted somewhat to now going after universities directly. And so there have been several cases, several major settlements under False Claims Act, which, so the argument is that universities, as Mara was saying, they were aware of their researchers' affiliations, and they did not disclose that to NIH, NSF, DOD. And it seems like right now, DOD and NASA grants are particularly being scrutinized. The one thing that, again, I don't know what to say about this, how to interpret it, but in the White House national security strategy that was just released last weekend, there was mention of how American consular officers should be really going out and looking for economic opportunities for businesses in every country that they are operating. And I think that kind of speaks again to the central importance that the administration is placing on on companies, which maybe ties into some of the arguments that were really novel at the time that Mara was writing her excellent book.
Mm. Yeah, and maybe just to add on to that, before I go over to you, Guinea, already several years ago, Congress added a funding line to the annual budget to place tech scouts in U.S. embassies across the world. And it was actually also in response to a recognition that Chinese embassies had staff that was pursuing that sort of strategy, where Chinese embassy staffers were going out into community and kind of looking for startups that were well matched with technology buckets that were outlined in kind of central government 5-year plans. And so I think we see a kind of expansion of the government and being a kind of technology diplomat. And that's, I think, happening across the board. But I wanted to give the opportunity to you as well to hypothesize a little bit about where the DC direction is going. And if you don't want to, which is what I'm seeing from your face, then what might Germany could do to sort of brace itself for that?
I mean, I think all this topic, right? I mean, I just want to say about China expertise. So what Germany ends up doing is like to call, we need China expertise. They have a German word, China competence. And I'm always laughing about it. I mean, I think it's really, as you said, Mara, it's really important, right? To be aware, to make professors, researchers aware of the risks. And I mean, there was some naivety, right? That people, especially scientists, they didn't know which university is good or bad in China. They were like, oh, so exciting. So there you need some more risk assessment and awareness. But how do you assess this risk? Okay, the solution is China competence. But this word, I always was like, yeah, so you get a nano scientist and teach him a little bit about China. Okay, but yeah, I mean, the other solution is we need a new generation who knows more about China. But the new generation, like, for example, we offer courses, masters in Chinese studies at the Free University. How many students do we have? 550 or 500 for our masters in Chinese studies? 5. This time I got the audience. So, and I mean, 5, right? 5 German students who are courageous to still study China, even though the media is so negative. And it used to be 20. It was never a huge, right? We are not a big political science subject, but right from 20 to 5, it's really hurting me because it's like China competence. It's, you know, also these are politicians. These are the people who run the research budgets. You need them everywhere. We do have 50 students in our new course called Masters and Global East Asian Studies. But out of the 50 students, 40 are Chinese. Yeah, so maybe they're coming away from the US and they're coming now to Germany, free education year and not so hard visa issues. So I think, yeah, things are shifting a bit. My main point I actually wanted to make is a little bit, I mean, in research, we also see a shift, right? If you see top publication in my field, but I also know in the tech field, they are coming more and more from China. And that actually creates also a very strange situation because you need sometimes really to collaborate with China. So what do we do now, right? And that is a little bit, so when I read these European documents, I think there's some fear in Europe that China overtakes also the research. And what do we do with this fear, right? We can do risk assessment and so on. But I wondered actually just, of course, from the university coming, maybe you should see what can you offer, right? The China has a 1,000 top talent program. Like we at the Free University have budget cuts, right? And like we are not creating new long-term professorships. And so I'm just thinking, I think risk assessment is all important, and we discuss this for hours, and we make small process steps, and it's getting better. But sometimes the underlying issue is also a little bit that 50% of AI researchers are Chinese working in the US or Chinese in China, and how do we deal with this change? And I don't know if the solution is espionage, right, and more checking, or actually thinking, how can we be better in innovation? But that's, of course, me coming from where I see this topic.
Maybe I'll just put a two-finger on that, and then we'll put it to the audience for questions. And just comparing a little bit the U.S. debate on China and the German debate on China, one thing I can sense very strongly is that the U.S. always had a larger group of professionals who had some education with regard to China and China expertise. And that's also being decimated right now. Actually, cuts to the State Department included cuts to China analysts in the State Department, whose job it is to do the kind of checking and scrutinizing of risks. And so that would be something that the German government would, I think, sensibly have to improve. I'll maybe leave it at that and look forward to questions from the audience. Okay, Rachel.
So I'll break the ice and ask one sort of specific, smaller question and one bigger question. You hinted at it a bit, but Eileen, I think you have some numbers on this. In terms of the policies, maybe not only the China initiative, but sort of all of the policies of the US, it is having the effect that China is more successful in drawing talent, I believe, than they were previously. So I wonder if you could say something about that in terms of some of the numbers of scientists who are moving to China. And then that relates to the bigger question, another question, which is, so the US has had these different iterations of a policy and a very, very nervous, hawkish approach to China in previous administrations. And both of you did a lot of work on, all the ways that went wrong. And without having to say what specifically a good policy would be, but how worried, in your opinion, should the US and Germany be about science and tech collaboration and competition with China? And if you have an idea of how they should do it better, then that would be great to hear as well.
Eileen, over to you.
Sure. Maybe I'll start with some of the numbers. There have been now that we are 2025, almost 4 years out from the end of the China initiative, there's been a number of academic studies that have tried to understand this issue of how many people are returning. And the numbers aren't perfect by any means, but I think it was, well, first of all, just by some grounding beforehand, I think between 2005 and 2015, surveys had showed close to 90% of Chinese graduate students, professors, early career folks that went to the United States really wanted to stay. And likely as a result of the China initiative, so between 2018 to 2021, 75%, there's been a 75% increase in returnees to China from the United States. I think there's other pieces of this as well. We talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. There have been studies that have shown that previously, the largest numbers of people that were working in artificial intelligence were in the United States, and that number is decreasing. The numbers that are working in China, on the other hand, are increasing. And it's hard to, say exactly how many people are leaving or staying, but one of the things that this suggests is that China is just becoming more attractive, not just for people that have studied in the United States or have worked in the United States, but also increasingly to work, to stay. And that's an area that's hard to capture in terms of numbers of how many people are just making different decisions. They might not be applying for programs that they would have. They may be choosing not to go into academia. They may be going into private sector. All of that is concerning.
Mara, do you want to weigh in as well?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, so these prosecutions started in the Obama administration, not under the first Trump administration, although that's when this program, the China Initiative, was launched. And, I think there was a growing recognition at the time that China is the major adversary of the United States. There is a huge priority in Beijing on moving up the technological value chain and developing, moving into high-tech areas. And I'm old enough to remember when people, experts in the West, kind of skeptical that China could innovate. And now, if you looked at sectors like electric vehicles, and at many areas of tech, they're on par or leading. And so there is I think a justifiable concern that that if China gets an edge in a certain area of technology, that could that could really tilt the direction of the future. And at the same time, in the United States, I think this issue needs to be dealt with in a way that recognizes the fact that the one major strength, or until recently, one major strength of the United States was that this foreign-born research force, much of which was Chinese, and to handle the issue in a way that doesn't alienate people. I mean, now under Trump too, you have, of course, other things going on at universities and other reasons that people might want to leave. In Europe, I think there's maybe more of a frenemy situation with China, and how you navigate that is I think it's a really interesting question, because you have countries like the Netherlands, for example, that has key technology in the semiconductor chip area, and they've been sort of squeezed by the U.S. government, and have adopted controls that many don't see as being in Dutch interests. So I think there seems to be cause for developing a more skeptical view of Chinese collaborations. But on the other hand, I see this kind of resistance toward just becoming an extension of the U.S. government. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can tell me what the answer is.
No, but I love the word frenemy. I'm going to use this every day now. Summarizes Germany and China policies.
Good. I maybe wanted to weigh in with one. Oh, yeah. Yes, please. The gentleman, please. Your name and your question.
Tom O'Donnell. I work in energy and geopolitics, but my first hat years ago, I did political science and China studies, but then I returned to the university and did my PhD in nuclear physics in U.S. So just as a background. So there's just as a point of reference, you guys were saying, just a side comment first, that there's this new thing in the Trump administration, get people to go out there and make deals and so forth from the embassies. But that's always been there in an intense way. You have, I mean, I could describe the structure, but in the State Department, like in the embassy here, there's the economic officer, and under them there's one in charge of manufacturing and industry and energy, and they're at all the industry shows and know everybody. But the Commerce Department everywhere is also there, and it's not necessarily based so much in the embassy, and they're constantly going around, and it's always been this way, holding shows and things. So it's interesting to see maybe it's a different way of doing. Anyway, so this is a comment. But the big thing I noticed about Germany being different than the United States and working in, say, nuclear physics, I did some research. I went around and talked to people in communications theory, information theory, but mainly communications or quantum computing, things I had worked in a bit before myself. And the problem here is that for a long time, there was no investment. the big black zero, and it goes back a long ways. So what I was told by students, to take communications theory, information theory, is we don't have any money. We don't have professors to teach even the courses. So our professors who want to get money for research, this is going back 5-7 years, okay, to do research, China will be willing to send somebody, but the deal is when they send them, you have to sign off that they can bring their thesis and the research they did back with them. Yeah, he works for, and they might even be from the Army school, or something. So it was very open and above board, but it was because the professors were poor, they were desperately looking, and they didn't even have equipment, and the Chinese would bring equipment that they couldn't afford to buy from the Americans. So it was a pretty, this sort of drove it. And so, for example, in quantum devices, the level in Germany is, it's good.
I don't want to cut you off too much,
Anyway,
but is there a question contained in
the question
your
is, the question is, I don't know. Germany is not dealing with this issue. It's just not. With military and so forth, it is. But the basis for it is the poverty, in a way, of the researchers. And how is that? I don't see how that's being dealt with. They have to have these research connections. You can have them with Americans, but these guys bring this money. That's as a question.
I think the question is also a little bit about the weaknesses that the German scientific enterprise is struggling with, and maybe you could comment
if you ask a German professor, they always say they're poor, but actually, you can get research budgets, right? Scripts, for example, we have, right, lots of research funding available. What I do notice, China has much more funding available. So actually, I'm really impressed, right? They always, we had a guest visiting professor from China. He was teaching in our program Chinese economy, because we didn't have anyone who could cover Chinese economy, right? And he was paid by China. We also have postdocs. There's so much money now, conferences. Even even for us, we get paid or offered to get paid, right? But a lot now, they pay us for workshops. It used to be that we pay more, but maybe that's also, right, the change now. If you look, especially in physics, for example, I know just because my dad works at CERN, that, right, the Chinese have been really increased their capacities. And of course, they are more better in research. They have more money. The government gives them more money, but they're also really good now. Yeah. And so I don't think the trend is that they come here anymore. The trend right now is actually a little bit, we are not going there and they are not coming here, right? I think we see a segregation now in research communities, and I think that's really sad. It really started with Corona, and now it's a very strange atmosphere among these visits. The will is there, but actually some of the Chinese colleagues are so good, they don't need us, and we're not sure how we collaborate. Yeah, and so, but actually my personal view is, especially in these geopolitical times, it's really important to have Chinese cooperation. So Scripps, we're going next year, right, to China, and it's actually more open than you think. And so it's, there's a lot of things you can do. If the politicians, right, get it wrong, let's try not to get it wrong among the research community. That's my hope.
It's probably also a little bit more closed than we would wish, but the lady in the back, please.
Hello.
Who you are and your question?
I'm Bianca. I'm a student, and I am very interested in China because I was born there. I have a question in general about your view on, as I understand, you were mostly kind of saying why it's a bad thing that we lose Chinese people wanting to do research in Europe and in the USA. But I would argue that, yes, maybe there is a potential loss of not being as attractive anymore. But on the other hand, I do believe that the West will always be attractive just because of freedom in research And also a negative thing in China right now is the Jugendarbeitslosigkeit. So there's not
Unemployment.
a lot of jobs for young people, which I think is another important point for deciding to move to China, especially in the years where people do masters, postdoc, blah, blah. And also, I do think that it makes sense for Europe to defend intellectual property since it's the most important Hebel we still have to be relevant in any way, since all the industries that China has already become dominant in, there's really no way to be competitive there anymore. So I do see the urgency maybe and to be scared that maybe this is one of the only resources we have to catch up.
Okay. Maura, I see you sort of reaching for your microphone. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, was a reporter in China, I spent a long time focusing on the Chinese efforts to recruit back scientists, which I say recruit back because initially they focused on primarily ethnic Chinese or Chinese-born people who'd gone to study overseas, who stayed, and then were trying to come up with ways to get them to move back. And initially those were pretty unsuccessful. And I talked to social scientists who study this, who looked at the reasons why they were unsuccessful. And, a major one was academic freedom and tenure, lack of tenure, that you could move back there and not be sure if you would have a job in 5 years. But also just the culture of needing to kind of work connections to move up in the institution, right? This sort of political culture of Chinese universities that's different than a European university. And so I think these are all things that that still like a German institution would have working in their favor. On the other end, I think clearly that the numbers show that the calculus has changed for many Chinese researchers in the United States, that they are choosing increasingly to go. And then now the scientific apparatus in China is more sophisticated. They can offer better labs. They offer labor, and I mean I was often told you can get 20 postdocs instead of I don't know, one or two, and that for many people is quite attractive. So
Yeah, Eileen.
Yeah, I think the point that the West is still attractive is definitely an important point to make. MIT Technology Review, every year we publish a list of the 35 top innovators under 35. And this year we surveyed them about how they were feeling about science and innovation and the ability to do their work under the new Trump administration and changes in policies. And it was really interesting. We had a number of people talk about leaving. There was one Chinese professor actually that had just accepted a position in the United Kingdom. And but he spoke of, he had the option of going back to China, but he was attracted to these ideas of freedom of expression, of democracy, all of the things that the West does offer. So that is a perspective that I think is important. We also spoke to a number of immigrants to the United States that said that, even with the changes in research funding, the uncertainty, immigration status, that there is still, at this moment, nowhere else that funds research to the degree that American universities and grant-making institutions do. But I think the question is, how long is that going to be the case? And to the question raised earlier about push and pull, we are so focused on I think one aspect of it and not really thinking about what can we continue to offer beyond what we've been able to offer in the past. So I think just rethinking some of those questions are important.
That's great. A question over here, please. Tell us who you are and what your question is.
Yeah, I have two questions. So my name is Bing Chen. I'm the publishing manager for a German media table briefings. Of course, we branded that we have the largest China editorial team among the German print media and digital media. So I have two questions. One question I think you already answered a little bit is like we see this trend of the scholars leaving US and maybe are attracted by China. Is that a short-term phenomenon, or do you think it would be a long-term phenomenon? So that's the questions on the two guests from the US. And I have another question is on the guests from the two German scholars. Because just last month, the German government set up the China Commission, the China Commission, which DGAP is also part of it. And at the same time, in this scholar circle, the Leibniz Forschungsnetzwerk also set up something like a China Commission. So why now? Why last month? It's like, does Germany really lack a lot of knowledge, a lot of competence about China? It's like, I'm from China. I've been living in Germany for 10 years. I see there's a lot of Chinese scholars and China experts in Germany. So I don't know. It's like, does Germany really lack so much knowledge about China? That's my concern or my doubt. Yeah.
I think those are two great questions. The US questions, do we have any interest in grabbing those, Mara?
Yeah, again, I really don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now. I think that's been the lesson of the past year. I think even for people who read Project 2025, kind of plans for the incoming administration, I think it's still a surprise. Some of the events at universities over the past year in the United States have still been a surprise. The degree, you had university presidents dragged before Congress, and also presidents, at least one has resigned, maybe more. This is a broader kind of crackdown on universities in the United States. So that surely has an effect on, I don't have numbers, but it surely has an effect on the decisions of scholars to leave, I would guess. So, where that will go or how long that will continue, I think is hard to say. But I think, before 2025, you had the China initiative, you had these prosecutions, and you had already concerns among the Chinese science community or Chinese-born Chinese science community in the United States, and then now you'll have these other developments at universities that I think must be adding to people's concerns, and also visas, right? That it's becoming people are worried about being stopped at the border, about not getting visas, or their postdocs not getting visas. I think those are all kind of real practical concerns.
I think also that some of these decisions about where, I'll speak about this professor that I spoke to that is now about to start in the UK. He left a tenure track position, an offer in the United States, and that in the United States means, it's a really excellent offer. It's long-term, comes with a lot of funding. He brought with him a spouse that was also an academic. So there's two people there, and when they leave, it's often in academia, it's a long-term commitment that you're making to another place. And every professor that leaves is potentially bringing all of their funding, all of their students. So all of these are kind of trickle-down effects that just build. So it's unclear, as I think all of us are saying, it's really unclear to know how the administration in the United States will continue to act, but these individual decisions all build on each other. So I think that's my best way of trying to answer that question, which is a really good one.
Maybe just from my own experience, my postdocs and PhDs are Chinese, most of them. And actually, because we are in social science, most of them don't want to go back to China right now, right? So I just want to clarify, we need to look a little bit, if you need a big lab, right, money matters. And then China is really attractive. But if you're in social science, there's still a lot of Chinese scholars who also be like, nah, I have a really good postdoc. He now goes for another 5-year postdoc to southern Germany in a really small town in the middle of nowhere. And he rather goes there than go back to China. And then he could get in any job in Beijing and Shanghai. Yeah, and they would pay him well. But for him, it's all about academic freedom. And so it depends, social science and natural science. And for example, in China right now, they really cut all social science programs really dramatically, right? They take this money to put it in AI and tech programs. And if you're a social scientist, of course, you don't go back to China. I'm not saying Germany is really hugely much better, but at least there's academic freedom. Yeah. In terms of about your second question about Germany has China expertise, right? We have quite a few China professors. I think the issue is a little bit, we have basically sometimes there is less linkages between professors and let's say, like politicians. We have NGOs who do the job well, like Merrick's. But still, I think there is a bit this feeling there is no independent China expertise in Germany. And that's why the politicians now have this, they just created this call. They even created money to create an independent China network. And for me, I don't know what they want, right? I mean, but it's politicians have suddenly the feeling, okay, we somehow need, right? Okay, we can't do our value-based policies anymore. We need to go to realpolitik, and really we need to change, but they don't know how to. And then they think they can create a China Commission. I think you will talk about it. But we need an independent China network, and then we get evidence-based data on China, and then we know as politicians what to do. And so they created these two initiatives. One, you mentioned the Leibniz network, and I talked to them. Actually, the speaker now is Philip Boeing. He just announced it. And they will, among the Leibniz, they will really have a network. And this is good that within Leibniz, all the different players, these are big universities and research centers, coordinate a little bit their China knowledge. And the idea is then, in addition, they want to do policy advising. Yeah, and I think the hope is that the politicians who really lack China knowledge or sometimes are lost in this complicated game of what the hell do we do with China, they just hope then to get this expertise to the politicians. Whether this works, I don't know. Yeah, but I think it just illustrates kind of lost atmosphere in Germany in terms of you can't be really for China, you can't be against China, right? This polarized topic, and they just hope by creating new institutions, there will be new solutions. But they also created the China Commission. Michael, you want to talk about this, right?
Yeah, I can add something to that. So just for those who don't know, the German parliament decided several weeks ago that they would set up an expert commission that would, in regular working meetings, provide analysis and advice for the German Bundestag. It's even going to be supported with a secretariat, so there will be staff to support this effort. And the reason it's being created, I think, is twofold. One is that there's a sense that Germany has done too little to impart de-risk from China, and that this urgency is only growing. And the second is that there's a strong feeling that while there is a lot of China expertise in Germany, too little of it is being used to inform policymaking. And this expert commission is one way to try to resolve this issue. And so I think it's going to have a lot of impact in generating public debate and probably also policy. We had
Can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
How much of that is driven by concern about industry? And, when I think about the German-China relationship as a non-expert in that relationship, I think about the German auto industry, and this morning I walked by the BYD dealership here, and I imagine there has to be anxiety over, Germany kind of went all in on building joint ventures in China. And seems to be kind of playing catch up when it comes to electric vehicles. So is there industry the driver behind that, or is it something else?
I can give an answer, but you wanted to say something first?
No.
Okay. I think industry plays an enormously large role in German policy on China, and it's evolved quite a bit over the past few years. And traditionally, German industry and German industry associations have been very restrained in their complaints, public complaints of kind of disadvantages that they face in the Chinese market compared to Chinese competitors. And this is beginning to change. And one of the ways you can see it changing is that certain industry associations are now coming up with China position papers in which they raise these issues. And in the spring of this year, the first two of these came out. One is from the VDMA, that's the Association of German Machine Builders, published a China position paper. And then the ZVE, which is the German Association of kind of the electronics industry, similarly published a China position paper. And both are very similar in what they say, which is basically there's a lot of industrial policy that has advantaged Chinese domestic players at the expense of German players. And one of the things that they, of course, are looking for is some support from the German government here.
I mean, I'm quite a lot on a panel with the German industry, and I always feel they yammer a lot, so they complain a lot, right? Their favorite word is the unequal market access, and they can go on and on forever. And the automobile is, I mean, it is really tough for Germany. It's going to be really ugly. But it's just the fact that German automobile also were late in the game and changing. Yeah. And yes, we didn't get the state support like China did, but what can you do? So there is a real atmosphere, I feel, of bitterness in the industry. And I find it interesting because I was just talking to a Chinese colleague, and he was like, isn't it funny, Genya? Yeah. Now it's getting harder, the competition. Yeah. And suddenly the Germans come with the values, right? I mean, the values didn't matter in the 80s and the 90s and 2000, and now it became so important. And I was like, oh, ouch, what do I say now, right? And that was a Chinese perception, and I thought it was like, interesting, right? I don't want to judge or comment because you immediately get attacked if I say what I think. But I was like, okay, I just noticed, and I was like, maybe it's the same with research, right? I had the German professors like, oh, all the publications now are by Chinese, and we can't get data access. And I'm like, yeah, it's easy to complain, but this is why I said, right? And what you mentioned, what can we offer? I mean, if it's, yeah, so I'm sometimes, I think the German industry doesn't love to hear this. And every time I talk to them, I can see they're like, oh no, a panda hugger. But I think it's maybe reality. Yeah? And we have a saying, life is not a Ponyhof, das Leben ist kein Ponyhof. Ne? I mean, what to do? I mean, and I think we have a lot of good things in Germany, a good industry. So it's not the end of the game. We just need to refocus and focus on our strengths, and blah, blah, blah. And it's doable. And the China Commission, one thing about it, they go on and on about they want to know where and how we should de-risk. Yeah, they realized we can't do decoupling, but they want to de-risk. And I think that's a good focus because there is a lack of data. No one knows how far have we de-risked, which areas. People always say, oh, the economy, the experts say, oh, we are not de-risking enough. The politicians want de-risking. So I think that my feeling is that's probably the main contribution of the China Commission to provide data on this. And then there can be a more fact-based discussion on this.
Good. We had a question in the first row. Tell us who you are, what your question is.
Hi, I'm Martin Sohner. I'm a researcher. My question relates to the cutting of funding and industry's response to it. So what we saw, you mentioned in the beginning that there were catastrophic budget cuts to academic funding in the US. We saw a similar thing in the Netherlands a couple of years ago when Geert Wilders' party was elected. Which was catastrophic for Dutch higher education, except in one city, in Eindhoven, where in Eindhoven you have this big technology campus. It's a very small city, but you have this big technology campus with TSMC, for example, and they were not having it. The industry pledged, I think, 20 billion euros to basically pick up the slack from the lack of funding. Do we see similar reactions of industry in the US or maybe even from China? You mentioned that there was funding money coming from China, even to Germany. Do we observe something similar in the US? My second question, I thought it was really funny that you mentioned the different reactions from Italy and the Netherlands. And I immediately remembered talking to my colleagues from Italy who get very good education, but they have to fight over the one good chair in the office. So higher education in Italy is notoriously underfunded, and in the Netherlands that was never the case. What do you think is the reason for the different reactions from Italy versus the Netherlands to China?
Let me immediately answer. I studied in Bologna, and I can agree Italian universities are very in poor state. But I think it's also the national geopolitical context, right? I think Germany and the Netherlands, I mean, they really feel much more they need to align maybe with US policies or European policies. Like Hungary and Italy, I feel they're smaller players and they might find their own ways. And Italy here really looks for an opportunity. Yeah, like we are not research strong. I mean, there's in many fields, Italy doesn't play a leading role in research. So they maybe just feel like we have no choice, but we need to focus on collaboration with China. And Hungary, anyway, is the other extreme, right? They see there's political alignment there. And so I think this is what I really thought. It's like really research and innovation now is really in a geopolitical context. And each country discusses and makes their own path. And yes, and the cuts are, I mean, in the US, we have cuts. In Europe, we have cuts. And that's the point, right? In geopolitics, we upgrade in defense, but we do education cuts. And it's a choice, and it's the choice societies make. Is it the right choice? That's debatable, right? But yeah, that's all I say.
Eileen, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I'm going to respond to the question about US funding coming from private sector in two maybe opposite ways. So the first is that a number of people that have been prosecuted or investigated under the China Initiative, some of them have made very public statements, including Gang Chen, who's a professor at MIT, about wanting to move away from federal funding. But that's very hard. There's been, I can think of off the top of my head maybe one or two people that have been successful in, after losing NIH funding, finding private funding to keep their labs open, but that's very, very rare. So it does exist, but it's hard. The other thing that I'll mention is with the cuts more broadly this year, as part of the surveys that we did of the 35 under 35, we spoke to some private sector entrepreneurs that also talked about how public funding cuts really affect their companies as well. Two of them worked in the biomedical fields, and they talked about how they looked at university research and university professors as really one of the areas where they find the early ideas that they can later commercialize. Because as small companies, they do not have the money, if they are not, the big multinational pharmaceutical companies, to really invest in this early stage research. And so the larger companies, yes, they can fund some of this, but this is really affecting the private sector as well.
Mara, do you want to know any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, then we'll conclude the evening. Mara, Eileen, thank you for flying in from Los Angeles and Amsterdam to come to join us this evening to discuss in a very thoughtful way a very important but tricky topic in Guinea. It's nice to have you. You had a very long way from the Free University in Berlin. And thank you to all of you for your excellent questions. And I invite all of you to thank our speakers and then to join us afterwards in the reception. Thanks a lot.